Hey guys, welcome to another space. I'm doing this new thing where I am trying out as an experiment recording my podcasts as Twitter spaces. I have a couple different podcasts that you can find over on my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I have the free podcast, which is the Actively Unwoke Podcast, which is what we're doing today. This podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify. It's available on the Substack. You can find the archives on the Substack. This will be the 58th episode of the podcast. And that is freely available. And I encourage people to subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice or through the Substack, whatever works best for you. I also have the Inner Circle podcast available through my Substack, which is my premium supporter only podcast. Now, I've been doing a thing where I've been recording those podcast episodes live. So if you get to the live recording either on the Twitter space or on the YouTube, you do get to listen to it regardless of whether or not you are a supporting member on my Substack. But then I make those podcasts go behind the member paywall after they are recorded. And so that's how we're going to do this. But today's topic is something that I just need to rant, and I'm sorry, and people find this distasteful. And, and I would welcome people grabbing a mic on the Twitter space and coming up and telling me what you think and tell me I'm wrong, and that's okay, and we can talk about it. But I have to say, I cannot get over how colossally James Lindsay is fucking everyone over. Okay, maybe that was a bit aggressive, and I understand that, and no, not everyone likes language, and God knows I hear about that all the time. But listen, this is serious. This is not a difference of opinion. This is not a personality conflict. This is not it's not any of those things. I am so incredibly sick of seeing James Lindsay telling people that the Democrats are communists. And he does it. This asshole has the gall to do it while having anti-communist in his profile, in his actual name that appears on the platform every time he tweets. Pro-America, anti-communist, based AF. Fuck you, James. And the reason I say that is this. It is actually a very pragmatic reason that I have this grievance. It's because every single time that James calls the Democrats communists, he's actually running cover for the real communists. Real communists do exist. Real communists in America are a real thing. Real radical revolutionary socialists that want and are actively planning right now to overthrow the federal government. These things are real. They exist. There are collective cells all over the country right now. And I know I sound like I'm a crazy person when I say this, but I've seen it on video. I've been to their events in person. You cannot deny that this is a real thing. It's bigger than people think it is. These groups are highly organized. These groups are communicating all the time. These are the groups that protested outside the DNC. Tens of thousands of these people protested outside the DNC in Chicago. These are people, they were protesting outside the RNC too, but they got way bigger numbers at the DNC. Why did they get way bigger numbers at the DNC, do you think? If Democrats are really communists, as James Lindsay keeps telling people over and over and over and over and over again, then why is it that the real communists, the self-identified communists, were protesting outside of the Democratic National Convention in far greater numbers than they were protesting outside of the RNC? This is something I've been talking about for years. And, people on the right, they don't understand this. Real socialists, and by the way, I use the term communist, socialist, and Marxist pretty interchangeably. Not that there's not differences between the three, but the reason that I use them interchangeably is because they use them interchangeably. They call themselves all three of those things, almost simultaneously. And so if they're using them interchangeably to describe themselves, I'm going to use them interchangeably. So don't make too much of it that I'm saying socialist instead of communist. They're basically the same thing so far as I'm concerned. But the thing of it is that a lot of people on the right don't understand that the real far left, again, these are the people who are actively planning to overthrow the federal government right now, right in front of us. They hate the Democrats far worse than they hate the Republicans, and it's not even close. They complain about the Democrats all the time. They call them neoliberals. They say they've capitulated to capitalism. They not only hate the Democrats, they hate the progressives, they hate the Democratic Socialists. They loathe AOC. They loathe Bernie Sanders. They feel that AOC and Bernie Sanders have capitulated to capitalism, and therefore they're like traitors to the cause. They hate these people. The Columbia University protesters, the people who actually ran the encampments at Columbia that then spread nationwide, they a couple weeks ago, maybe it was about a month ago now, on their Substack, released a whole article completely denouncing AOC. So don't tell me that the Democrats and the communists are the same thing. They are screaming from the rooftops that they are not the same thing. In fact, I have a clip from the Revolutionary Communists of America, and I see someone's requested the mic, and I'll be happy to bring people up. Just give me a little bit more a minute to rant, Chief Keith, and I'm happy to bring you up after that to have questions and dialogue. And if anyone else wants to grab a mic and get in line to come join me, please feel free to do so. I need to work out some feelings here, okay? So I actually have a clip, and you can find this in the highlights reel on my Twitter, from the Revolutionary Communists of America. The Revolutionary Communists of America are a political party. They're the ones who, if you guys saw all the conservatives complaining about communists are protesting in the streets, in Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, there was all this video going around of all these people in red t-shirts marching through the streets. That's the Revolutionary Communists of America. The Revolutionary Communists of America are actually, they've been around for a while. They're the American offshoot of something that used to be called the International Marxist Tendency. This is a group that's been around since about 1992. So they have a lot of longevity, and they have branches in pretty much every country. And last year, I think almost a year ago now, they decided to actually start launching new official revolutionary communist parties in countries all over the world. They launched them in the United States. They launched them in Canada, the UK, Sweden, Switzerland. I think like many others in Europe that I'm not going to be able to do. Italy. They have branches all over the world. These groups are completely independently funded. They're not funded by George Soros or Alex Soros or any of those things. In fact, they denounce taking money from these groups because they think that it gets in the way of their political purity. The Revolutionary Communists in America specifically have been, for years now, running these things across the country called Marxist School. This is basically where they go into a city and they set up shop in some hotel or conference room or, collective group or something, and they actually run classes, full weekend classes, to indoctrinate people into Marxism. You can just Google Marxist School. You can see pictures of these things. They get hundreds of people that will pay them money to go to these Marxist school classes. They run dozens of these things every year all over the country in all different cities, from New York to Chicago to Minneapolis to, basically every city that you can think of, and they put the videos online. Well, last year, I found one of those videos, and this was right after they had officially launched their political party. By the way, the Revolutionary Communists of America have self-reported that they've tripled in size in the last year. These people are not messing around. They recruit on college campuses. They recruit through workplace unions, all this stuff. And their specific goal is not even to run political candidates. Now, that might sound funny to people, right? You say, what? Like, they're in a political party. Why aren't they running political candidates? Because a political party gives them a way to organize, and it gives people something to join. It gives people a social circle to be a part of. So these people are not under any illusion that they are going to overthrow capitalism in the United States by getting elected to office. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they want to give people something to join so they can get them ingrained in the social system. Anyway, I'm going to come back around to the point that I was starting at. So last year, we found this video from one of their Marxist schools where they are openly and brazenly talking about overthrowing the federal government in the United States, overthrowing the U.S. Senate, overthrowing the White House, raising the red flag of communism above the White House. They say it clearly. You can find this in the highlights reel on my Twitter. In that clip, they flat out said, the conservatives are so stupid to call us Democrats. We're going to show them who the real communists are. I bring this up because this is the core of the issue. This is why James Lindsay is fucking everyone over. And it's not just James Lindsay, by the way. It's just like, I look at him and I'm like, bro, you should know better. You should know better. Like, I can forgive a lot. Well, I don't forgive them, but I can understand a lot of these kind of low IQ conservative pundits who just are coming out and they're saying the talking points that they're being paid to say, oh yeah, the Democrats are commies, vote for Trump, blah, 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 whatever. I can overlook that because this is not supposed to be their area of expertise. They are political figureheads. They're paid shills, nothing more. James Lindsay presents himself as an academic in this area who is the world-renowned expert in this area, and it seems to me that he cannot tell the difference between real communists who are flat out saying on video all the time, we're not Democrats, we hate Democrats, we're not Democrats, we hate Democrats, we're not Democrats, we hate Democrats. He cannot distinguish between real communists and plain old like Democrats who might have bad ideas. I'm not insinuating Democrats don't have bad ideas, but the real communists, their ideas are so much worse. And the thing of it is every time you distract people by saying the Democrats are communists, what happens is this: you allow the real communists and the real Marxists to operate completely unabatedly. This is why I scream about this issue all the time. I'm not just being a pain in the ass, although don't think I mind that. I scream about this issue all the time because the real far left in this country has no opposition. There's no one talking about them except for me. There's no one watching them except for me and my community and the people who follow my stuff. There's no one who knows what they're doing. There's no one who's reporting on what they're saying. I shouldn't say no one. Andy No actually does a reasonably good job of following different pockets of the far left. So I'll give credit. I shouldn't say no one, but there are so few people reporting on this. And every single time someone like James Lindsay goes out, and the reason I say this is he has got an entire Twitter feed right now calling the Democrats communists. If you can't see his Twitter feed because he's blocked you, like, I can understand that, but like, I'm looking on his Twitter feed right now. James Lindsay retweeted someone saying, let's stop calling them Democrats. Let's stop calling them liberals. They're Marxists, plain and simple. No, they're not. Real Marxists are way worse and are way more dangerous. James Lindsay retweeting another person. Communism will reign supreme if Harris is elected. No, it won't. Kamala Harris has flat out told the real communists to fuck off at her rallies. Kamala Harris's husband has given speeches calling Kamala Harris a capitalist. Now, again, I'm not saying I'm a fan of Kamala Harris. I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris. I'm not a fan of her at all. But Kamala Harris is not a communist. She is an opportunist progressive that was given a chance to be president of the United States, which she probably thought that she would never have. And now she is saying the words that are written for her to say because the entire Democratic machine has rallied around her, and she's not a communist. She's just not. And anyone who watches Real Communism with me knows this just based on listening to her. And again, you don't have to like her. I'm not suggesting that she's good, but there is a difference between an opportunist progressive figurehead and a real revolutionary socialist that is actively planning to violently overthrow the federal government. Those are two different things. Let's see, what else has James Lindsay got on his Twitter feed right now? Theo Jordan. I love Theo Jordan. I have nothing but love for him. I really do. But the fact that Theo Jordan keeps like parroting James Lindsay's lines, it just like drives me crazy. James Lindsay retweeted him today. James Lindsay's retweeting End Wokeness, saying they're communists. And actually the funny thing is, End Wokeness is posting a video about someone being an anti-capitalist. That's an actual socialist. That's not a Democrat. If someone's saying they're an anti-capitalist, that is an actual socialist, not a Democrat. But James isn't explaining this to people. And it just goes on and on and on. This is James's Twitter feed all day long, every day. They're communists, they're communists, they're communists, they're communists, they're communists, they're communists. It's like, shut up. He's deceiving people. He's lying to people. He's doing this to make money. And he is just one of dozens of conservative figureheads who do this, but he's the one that really should know better. So anyway, that's my rant, and I have Chief Keith who requested a mic. If anyone else wants to request a mic, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this and come up, and I can rant about this all day, every day, but I do think that this is a very big problem, and I think that every single time that James Lindsay or anyone else says that the Democrats are communists, that actually allows the real communists and the real socialists to win. So I think it's a bigger problem than people want to admit. And so that's why I'm so angry about this. But Chief Keith, I would love to hear what you have to say. Go ahead.
How's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Uh, good to be here. Longtime fan. Watch your content. This problem has been going around for a long time. I remember, if you remember back to 2017, when Milo came to UC Berkeley, that was a big incident, right? You had Antifa in tandem with Oakland gangs that are bringing up to, harass conservatives on campus and, beat people up. So I remember there was one image that came out of that protest where it was, graffiti sprayed on the wall, and it said, "Liberals get the bullet too," and it was a hammer and sickle scribbled under that. So I mean, conservatives, they completely missed the mark when it comes to, calling out communists for what they are. Right? They say the Democrats are communists. They say that they're, Marxists, they're socialists. It's kind of just become this meaningless, jingoism they use to attack their opponents, right? Like it's like the same thing that the left does to people like us. They say you're a fascist, they say you're, neo-Nazi, things like that. And it really just is due to a lack of understanding of the actual political forces that are going on. So there is this kind of new communist movement, Jackson Hinkle communists, but a lot of the communists that you see on the streets, like you're mentioning, the revolutionary communists, they are Trotskyites, right? So,
Yep.
I mean, these are, radically fanatical left-wing people that are going out there. They're trying to, recruit students, trying to recruit workers, political activists for their cause. And it's dangerous, right? So, I mean, you can tell it's such an institutional bias against us, right? There's Right Wing Watch, there's Media Matters, constantly publishing hit pieces on right-wing figures, but there's no far left-wing watch. There's no, any watchdog organization for any of the far left extremists, which there are many, right?
Yeah, I'm the far left wing watch. That's me.
Right. I mean, it's true, but it's like, there is really no organization out there. I mean, the SPLC, that's a joke, but they're always on us, right? It's never actually categorizing, alleged extremist groups holistically. It's always, slanted towards the right wing, trying to, crack down on really freedom of speech under the guise of, anti-fascism or something like that. So, I mean, it's dangerous. I mean, I don't know how anyone feels about Jackson Hinkle. I'm not a supporter of his. I'm not a fan. Personally, I'm a clipper for Keith Woods. But it's really hard to fathom when you look at what's actually going on in the streets. And you'll see it. You see it at these riots. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Unicorn Riot.
Yeah.
They're
we watch them. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, they're a left wing outlet, I would say, but they are documenting what's actually going on in the street. I mean, Channel 5, Andrew Callahan does great work. I mean, he went to the DNC and he was talking with a bunch of Trotskyite, communists, like the Workers' Party or something. And these people are mobilized, and it's dangerous. So I'll hand it back off to you.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like a lot of what you had to say. In regards to Jackson Hinkle and the American Communist Party, I'm not sure that that's something I really take seriously yet, if I'm honest about it. Now, there are a couple concerning things to me about that. So, I don't know how many people know this, but there is this party called the Communist Party USA that is kind of like what people think of traditionally as the Communist Party in America. They are completely ineffective. They're not even really that relevant. I stopped covering their content years ago because it just wasn't that relevant. But what happened earlier this year is the Communist Party USA actually had a purge of their party where basically the leadership of their party came out and said, you guys have to vote for Joe Biden because Donald Trump is more dangerous. And a lot of people in the party was like, fuck you guys, we don't want to vote for Joe Biden. Like, Joe Biden is not a communist. And so the CPUSA actually purged a lot of those people. And that is how Jackson Hinkle's American Communist Party actually got formed. It was the purged people from CPUSA. And the guy that is the executive chairman of the American Communist Party, his name is Hawes. And I know that a lot of you guys are familiar with Hawes. Hawes isn't even a Trotskyite. Hawes is a Stalinist. And it's like there's also this weird dynamic between a lot of the revolutionary communist groups where you have like the Leninists, like the traditional Bolsheviks, and then you have the Stalinists, and they don't get along. That's actually one of the biggest infighting that happens between these groups because the Leninists believe that Stalin basically ruined everything. So you have the Revolutionary Communist Party of America, they're Leninists, they're like traditional Bolsheviks, and then you have the American Communist Party who are the Stalinists, and like the Revolutionary Communists of America are saying the American Communist Party isn't even a real thing. And so that's actually kind of funny little like wonky leftist infighting. But I'm not worried so much about Hawes Jackson Hinkle and Hawes's like party from the perspective of I don't think they're going to be able to recruit to the point of like the Revolutionary Communists of America, or quite frankly, the real thing that's actually terrifying is these groups that we've talked about. We're not even talking about queer Marxism, which is really the most dystopian of all the Marxisms. And that is actually where most revolutionary socialists of America are right now. They're embracing more of like this queer Marxist thing where like the revolutionary communists of America don't believe that queer Marxism is a real thing. They actively try to keep it out of their party. So they're not actually embracing things like gender ideology and all of that. Whereas many of the revolutionary socialists in America that are in Antifa, that are going to the far left organizing events, they absolutely embrace gender ideology as part of like an integral part of their strategy to be able to abolish capitalism and all that stuff. So there are all these different groups. They all believe different things. But one thing they absolutely agree on is they hate Democrats. And they are not Democrats, and Kamala Harris is not a communist, and they will not vote for Kamala Harris. And because of that, again, they're able to operate completely unopposed in our landscape because like everyone thinks that the Democrats are the real communists, and that's just not the way it is. Brian, I see you have your hand up. What do you have to say?
Well, the process of communization of the Western world was mostly completed in the late 19th and early 20th century when you had things like minimum working hours and minimum wages instituted.
Sure.
I mean, you have two strains of communism, the revolutionary one, which has worked some places, although not the ones that Marx said, as we all know. He thought it would be people in like England who would have a revolution, and they never did. It was like retarded peasants who took this stuff up, or like factory workers who were one step off the farm, not well-nourished English people. But so you're already there in this communist dystopia where you can't, use a cart without a permit. And even that came into the UK in 1865. So rather than associating this, as many people do, with personalities or ideas derived from personalities, I tend to look at it more from the perspective of economics, which is that there's been this communizing or collectivizing tendency throughout history. And like in sociology, the big distinction is between, and funny, Max Weber, who I think was sort of left-wing, he was actually an ontological individualist. He thought that to explain sociological phenomena, you had to look for individuals, their motivations, their hopes and desires, and look at it that way. The perspective that all of these more recent people have is in sociology called holism, which is that there are like emergent properties so that you can't pin things down to individuals, which they call reductionist, as basically a way for avoiding radical individual responsibility. Like if you're doing something, it's you who's doing it. You're not just a subject to systemic forces. You're doing something, you're doing it. You have to accept that. Even if you're doing it to get paid or, because it's your job, you're still doing it, right? So you have these people who are very confused about where they are and what they are. Like the big question to tell if someone's like mentally retarded or not is you ask them where they are. And if they give you a description like planet Earth or in a valley or something, then maybe they're sane. But as soon as they identify with a commune like the United States or whatever, well, I mean, God help us all, right? Because most people are communists. They identify with the communes in which they were registered when they were born.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to disagree with some of your perspective here. And I should be really clear. This might just be a matter of perspective. And for people who might be new to me, I don't talk about the historical development of communism unless I absolutely have to. There are a lot of you guys that probably know more about that than I do. I don't think it's unimportant, but my thought process behind it is that there are so many people talking about it that you don't need another person talking about it. Where I focus on what real activists are doing in the real world right now, because I have this crazy idea that if you want to stop what the left is doing. You actually need to know what they're doing in the real world right now. And the historical development of it is just not always, it doesn't always lead you to understanding what they're actually doing. Sometimes it does, a lot of times it doesn't. What I will say is that I fundamentally reject the idea that we have communism in the United States right now, and I'm going to explain why. Because the way that the real activists currently describe it, and you can laugh all you want, bro, but you want to listen before you laugh at something. See, this is part of the problem. This is part of the problem.
I'm not
with people.
laughing.
Hang on, I'm not saying you, Brian. I'm saying this guy that just talked. This is part of the problem with people is they don't even take the time to listen to an argument before they dismiss it, and that is part of why you guys are losing so fucking badly. The argument is this, and we have real revolutionary socialists on tape saying this over and over and over and over and over again. What they want to do, of course, is to abolish capitalism. How do they define the term capitalism specifically? They define it as private property ownership. What does private property ownership mean? And again, this is in their words, this is not in my words. It means your ability to own a home, your ability to own land, your ability to own an apartment that you rent out as a landlord, your ability to own intellectual property, your ability to own a private business, no matter how big or small that private business is, your parental rights over your children, and your individual liberties. That is the definition of private property ownership. So why I reject the notion that we currently have communism in this country is we still have the ability to own a home. I own my home. I'm sure many of you own your home. We can bicker about, oh, the bank owns your home and taxes and all that stuff. Okay, fair enough. But in their utopia, you don't have the ability to buy a home. You will be assigned a home, and you may or may not like that, and that's going to be based on your status in society. We still have the ability to buy land. We still have the ability to own apartments. They are absolutely responsible for these squatters' rights movements. Again, bro, you can laugh all you want, but
just when you're done.
Do not interrupt me.
When you're done. When you're done.
Interrupt me. Do not interrupt me. I let you talk. Do not interrupt me. We still, okay, well, you can get booted from my space if you're going to keep on being an asshole. Like, I don't really care. But like, so to continue before I was rudely interrupted. We still have the ability to own apartments that we rent out as landlords. So these people are behind the squatters' rights movement. That is an effort to take away private property. But the fact of the matter is, you still can buy an apartment and rent it out as a landlord or use it as an Airbnb or whatever. We still have intellectual property rights in America as it stands right now. We still have parental rights in America. This is something that's actively under attack right now from these people. But as it stands right now, we still have parental rights. We still have individual liberties in America. These people want to actively overthrow our Constitution and get rid of all of that. So until those things have happened, until we have lost our ability to own a home, to own land, to have parental rights over our kids, to run a small business, I run several small businesses, I'm sure many people here do too, we are not going to have that right when these people win. This is just reality. And so until that happens, we do not have communism in America. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to let you respond, and I'm going to ask you to respond politely. And if you don't, I'm going to remove you from my space, because this space is my private property, and I will treat it as such. It is
all right.
No, I'm not done yet. Not done. Until the more you guys try to convince people that we are already the communist states of America, the more you are lulling people into doing nothing to fight back against the left. If people believe that we're already in communism, there's just nothing we can do. We've been in communism for 100 years. Those people are going to sit on their asses and not do anything productive to fight back, because they're going to think that the fight is already lost. We need people who are out there learning what the left is doing. We need people who are out there teaching other people what the left is doing. And every time you guys come in and you're like, oh my God, we're already communists, it's all over, there's nothing we can do, you are creating more of a problem. So now you can respond.
All right. So I didn't say there's nothing you can do. But all of this talk about buying land, like what happens is the communists of the 19th and 20th century developed industrial states, often with the same name as a prior state that wasn't communist, and then they would monopolize the land base and dole it out. This happened in America without any previous states. I'm Paleo-American on one side of the family, so we have a bit of understanding of how things were here before.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mute you.
Well, they stole in your war making.
I'm going to mute you again. This is my space, bro. This is my private property, bro.
Money is for slaves. Men fight.
All right.
Men
now you're getting booted.
Money is
Bye. See, this is like, so, see how private property works, guys, is I get to invite people into my house, and if those people don't follow the rules that exist in my house, I will kick their asses out. What that guy was saying, and the reason that I muted him, was because he was trying to convince people that you cannot currently buy land in this country. That is just false. That's false. That's not true. And so we do not deal with crazy conspiracy theory nut jobs. We don't deal with that. We deal with what we can prove. We deal with what the evidence says. And sadly, there are so many of these crazy conspiracy theorist nut jobs that exist in this space that it's like and this is part of the reason why people have all these crazy ideas. Anyway, I did see, so Chief Keith, I see you do have your hands up. I do want to go to some people who haven't spoken yet, and then we can come back to you. And if anyone else has something they want to say, please do grab a mic. Brian, I see that you just raised your hand. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I just got here, and I was wondering if you think in this country most of the CLO in these companies take advantage of the people when buying a house.
So, okay, so your question is, so are people taken advantage of in the country? Like, so what? So I just want to make sure I understand your question, because
On house buyers.
So
let's say I want to buy a house, right? And the company who wants to sell me the house, can they play around and take advantage?
Well, can people be taken advantage of when they're buying a house? I mean, people can be taken advantage of when they're buying anything. That's just true of anything. People can be taken advantage of in any business relationship. But that's like, you have responsibility in that as well. And I think that this all comes down to like personal responsibility. You are choosing to enter into a voluntary relationship, a voluntary transaction, whether that be like in a job that you might have, because one of the arguments that, I know this isn't what you asked, but I'm just going to go down this road for a second. One of the arguments that you could make is like, owners of businesses, bosses take advantage of their employees, and so that's something that that's bad for employees, and that's why we should have communism. Well, those employees entered into a voluntary agreement to do a job for a set salary, and if they didn't want to do that job, then they can go get another job somewhere else, or they can start their own business. It's easier than ever to start a business right now. You can do it with free tools on the internet. And so, and I kind of feel the same thing about house ownership. It's like, there are all sorts of, you can honestly take advantage of some of the very communist programs that exist in the United States right now, like first-time homeowners loans and things like that to buy a house that can actually help you. There are ways, like, of course, there are situations where you can get taken advantage of, but again, this just comes down to people doing their due diligence and being smart about it. But at least you have the ability to do it, right? We're not going to have that ability if the left wins. Does that answer your question, Brian? All right, I'm going to see the 100. Okay. Patriot Pepe, you just joined. What do you have to say about this?
I just wanted to say that I just got kicked from a space because they thought I was being racist.
All right, well, we're not talking about that right now, though. We're not talking about that. I need you to stay on topic.
What are we talking about? I just dropped it.
Yeah, we're talking about communism in the United States. So if you don't know, I'm gonna advise you, Patriot Pepe, sit back and listen for a few minutes, okay? Because I'm recording for a podcast right now, so I'd like to kind of stay on topic. I appreciate the cooperation. Mac Birch, what do you have to say?
No, you're absolutely right. And I've only been in the, your space for probably about, I'd say maybe close to a year and stuff, couple months. But no, James Lindsay is sitting there being a shill and, sitting there bullshitting everybody. And, he's sitting there getting his paychecks from Mills for Liberty. And, Logan Lansing is too, and Lisa Logan, and, how I still remember when we crashed his space on his new discourses, chat and everything, and we were sitting there telling everybody, no, James is lying about all of this. It doesn't, it's not a Gnostic sex cult like he claims it is. And for those who have never heard James Lindsay say that, communism is a Gnostic sex cult, go look at his Twitter space. He calls it, it's embarrassing, and he calls himself an academic.
Yeah, I mean, James has referred to communism as a Gnostic cult on more than one occasion. This is on his Twitter. He's done podcasts about it. And the thing of it is what MacB is talking about is we kind of took over one of James Lindsay's podcast premieres to try to, properly inform people. He was basically doing this premiere about like queer theory or whatever. And James doesn't know anything about queer theory. I'm sorry. He pretends to know about it. But what James says about queer theory doesn't match up with what real queer Marxists say in the real world at all. And so we essentially took over his podcast premiere, and we were in the chat trying to educate people about what queer actually is. And James got so pissed off, and he was blocking everyone, and he was changing the requirement to be a subscriber on his channel for a certain amount of time so people couldn't chat in. And he was like, it was really funny to watch. We actually have the whole thing on tape. But like one of the things was that, that was shocking to me, MacB, and again, this is why I will not stop screaming about this issue, is that James Lindsay's audience is completely uninformed. But they think they're informed. And I don't blame them, because this is not actually their fault. This is James's fault, because James does these like 3-4 hour podcasts where he's like talking about all this academic stuff, and he's reading these papers, and I'm not saying that everything that he does is bad, because I think that, I have to give James credit for really helping me to start to understand this stuff back in 2020, but 2020 was a very different time than what he's doing now. And so I'm not saying there's nothing of value that he's doing, but what I am saying is that his audience doesn't know the basics about what this is. His audience cannot define what capitalism means. His audience cannot define what queer means. His audience gets upset when people try to show them primary source evidence because it contradicts what they've heard from James. It's like he's created this cult of personality around himself where like it really is bizarre to watch, and he is framing everything in terms of like a spiritual battle, which is also funny because James is an atheist. He's not a Christian. He is an atheist. And he's out there quoting the Bible in his speeches, and he's acting like a preacher. And the whole thing just seems very disingenuous to try to appeal to the wine moms that are in Mills for Liberty. And it's just like, again, it's like one of those things where you have normal people that are looking for answers, and it's coming from a good place, and James is the person saying, I will tell you why all this crazy shit is happening, and then he's lying to them, he's deceiving them, he's not explaining what these ideas mean. And so then these people are going out into the world, and they're trying their best to fight back in their school districts or in their local towns or local communities or things like that, and it's just getting all fucked up. And in the meantime, the far left is still winning. And the far left is laughing at this entire situation because they've got the conservatives in this pattern of chasing their tail where they're not even doing anything productive to fight back against them. All right, I want to go back to Chief Keith. Chief, what do you have to say?
Hey there. Yeah, I love everything you're saying, Carlin, because it is true, right? And you realize that, at least for me, that a lot of these, I like to call them blue-haired Marxists. We talked before about the Stalinist kind of Trotskyite divide, like Jackson Hinkle, and people like Has and people like Vaush. Like there's a lot of these, figureheads. A lot of these blue-haired communists, whatever you want to call it. I see a lot of their ideology, their poisonous ideology, definitely arising from the Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
People don't want to talk about that because, the Frankfurt School theorists were, Jewish theorists. And that's obviously inconvenient. So someone like James Lindsay, might want to brush over that, right? Because that is, an inconvenient fact when you talk about, being an anti-communist. You have to call out where it comes from the source. So, and that's how, and you can see that their ideology, the Frankfurt School was literally psyops for the CIA. The thinkers, Theodore Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse was literally in the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. And they were shilling his books, pushing his books to kind of create a new synthetic left that was friendly to American power in the Cold War. So that's where it comes from. And you can tell that these blue-haired communists, these Marxists, neo-Marxists, whatever you want to call them. There's a lot of words, Marxist, humanist, I've heard before. It comes from these thinkers, the Frankfurt School, right? It's talking about gender theory, it's talking about critical theory, critical race theory, anti-racism, directly from the mouths of these Jewish theorists in academia in the 60s and 70s. So, there's a big divide. You literally have these communists talking about, beefs from the 1930s, right? Trotskyites versus Stalinists, Stalinists call it Trotskyites, rad-libs, and you have, as a former leftist, the Trotskyites call the Stalinists, like red fash. It's just this kind of nonsense. But I think that really understanding the modern lefts comes from an understanding of the Frankfurt School and these Jewish thinkers. I don't really see there being a viable Stalinist, kind of left-wing authoritarianism. It is all these kind of, neo-Marxists that really came out of the 1960s, right? So that's where I see it. I mean, it's not to say that these groups aren't dangerous. They're the things that they believe are crazy, obviously. But I think that to really kind of diagnose the problem, you really have to diagnose the source. And that is the Frankfurt Jewish thinkers, right? So I'll pass it over to you again. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I think you obviously know your stuff, and I definitely like to, connect with you after all this is over. I don't know if you and I have actually interacted on here before, but you obviously know what you're talking about. What I will say is that I don't want to get too far into the whole, like, are there Jewish origins to all of this stuff? And that's certainly a conversation I'm open to having, by the way. I will say, actually, and we might be watching this, I think we're going to watch this on my channel at 5 o'clock. I was going to watch something else, but it has come into my inbox that James Lindsay apparently had a whole conversation with a rabbi, and I think it's one of the rabbis that Candace Owens talked to that got her in trouble with the Daily Wire back in the day, and so he's bending the knee to all of that, and so I think that actually might be a funny conversation to watch. I'm not one of those people that will go on and on about, like, if the origins of this were Jewish. I will tell you that I do know an academic that studies critical race theory and has dug deep into, like, the origins of critical race theory, and she sent me a DM several months ago now saying, Carlin, I'm starting to freak out because every time I go back in the origins of critical race theory, I end up at the Kabbalah. And I was like, isn't that interesting? And we've certainly watched.
What's her handle?
I don't want to say her handle. I don't want to get her in trouble. But if you DM me, I'll tell you her handle. But I don't want to get her. I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to get her in trouble publicly because she doesn't talk about this sort of thing. So like it's one of those things too where we've watched episodes on. We've actually watched gender trainings on my channel given by like Jewish like rabbis and like temples and all that stuff where they're talking about how they are the origin of like the idea that there's more than one gender, and like they're talking about the origin of some of the neo pronouns that people use that aren't he or she, and how it comes from them and all this stuff. And so I think it is undeniable that there is some there to this. What I will say is, and this is a disagreement that I have with you guys, and I'm open to hearing evidence about this and talking about it, but the radical revolutionary socialist activists that I watch today, most of them are not Jewish. Most of them don't have any connection to this stuff. I would be interested to see if people can prove to me that they have funding sources that come from Jewish people or Jewish organizations or things like that. I'd be more than open to looking at that. But I think what we're dealing with, and again, I think we have to be honest about this, I think we're dealing with a mutated strain of Marxism in America that may have come from, the Frankfurt School. They brought it here in the 30s when they landed at Columbia University. I think we can all agree on that. But at some point, it mutated off and became its own separate thing. I think that it got heavily influenced by like punk and anarcho-communist counterculture in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, just because they started doing a lot of things that were done in the punk community to spread propaganda and to recruit and all that sort of thing. And so I think we're dealing with a different strain of it now. That's not to say the historical origins of it don't matter, and I think that's certainly a part of the conversation, but I do think these are it's a different nuanced thing that I think is worth considering. Chief, what do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of influences on the movement. Sorry if you can hear a dog bark in the background.
All right.
But it's definitely a lot of influences, right? Certainly through the Frankfurt School. Sorry about that. Certainly through the Frankfurt School, but it really does come from these theorists, right? The anarcho-communist movement in the 70s, right? That has this influence in punk. But it does make sense when you talk about what the Frankfurt School thought. I mean, they placed more of an emphasis on kind of intersectionalism and talking about not historical materialist analysis, but one that sought revolution from groups that were typically on the outs of society. So the LGBT, Black people, and the civil rights movement. So a lot of this manifested during that. And you can look back at the Rome 68 protests. There were these big protests in Rome, these big communists, and people were holding up signs that said, Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. So you can see the kind of historical and ideological underpinnings in this, right? It comes from the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was directly advocating this stuff. They wanted to have these out groups kind of cause a revolution. They felt that the working class in the West had kind of become dulled by, the welfare state, and they lost the revolutionary potential. So using these out groups to kind of work and to blow up society from the inside to bring about revolution and change. So that's where it comes from. And I see direct parallels to what's going on now, right? You had this emphasis on race, on gender, on, all this stuff, intersectionality comes directly from these thinkers. And they were all Jews. I mean, that's the bloody truth, right? Maybe you want to, obviously you said before that not all of these communists are Jews, sure, but their ideology is Jewish. It comes from the Frankfurt School. And when you look at this stuff, it's all tied into Magnus Hirschfeld. He was the first one in Nazi Germany in the Weimar Republic, really to, have the pioneering the idea of transgenderism. And it also flows down to people like Foucault and the queer theorists, like you said, who are also Jewish. I mean, Judith Butler and Gail Rubin are Jews, Pat Califia as well. And there's a great video if you want to learn more about queer theory. It's Queer Theory Jeopardy with Derek Jensen. I would encourage everyone to watch that.
I don't like that video. If I'm honest about it, I feel like that video, and listen, I do, and people have recommended that video to me before, and I've looked at it, and the reason I say I don't like it is there's this thing that happens with social media in that people are always looking for the most outlandish thing, but the most outlandish thing may not be representative of the whole, it may not be a good representation of like what's happening on the whole. Let me give you a different example. So like Robin DiAngelo
Sure.
is one of the people that kind of got me started in this area because I read White Fragility all in one day and it descended me into insanity because it's an awful, awful, awful book. And Robin DiAngelo is just one of those people that's been lifted up for years in terms of she makes great clickbait content because she'll flat out say over and over again, all white people are racist, yada, yada, yada. But the thing is, and I learned this when I started branching out because I started just doing all these deep dives and watching as much diversity training as I could find online and as many other people that I could find. Robin DiAngelo is really she's like the only person actually saying that. And when you listen to everyone else, they're taking different lines. They're talking more about systemic racism, which is really what they mean by systemic racism is capitalism. They're not talking about white skin color. They're not talking about white people. They're talking about whiteness as an institution, which is about slavery and all that stuff. And they'll flat out say like black people can be white too and things like that. So it's like one of those things where sometimes you have these things that circulate on social media that sound really crazy, and they are, but they're an anomaly when you actually look at it in the greater context of what the left is saying as a whole. Does that make sense?
I agree, but I also disagree. And I love your point about Robin DiAngelo. I like to call her the queen of DEI, right? Because you had this corporation, their HR offices, and their former DEI offices. We know that some universities and corporations shutting them down now after affirmative action got overturned, right? But you had corporations literally recommending her book and like making it mandatory reading for employees. The book is White Fragility, right?
Yep.
They're mandating their employees read that. So I like to call her the queen of DEI. When I bring up the queer theorists, it is kind of from the horse's mouth. They do say this in their writing. They do talk about the age of consent laws. Foucault,
I'm sorry, I got to interrupt there. They really don't, though. Yeah. And listen, I have like hundreds of hours of this stuff on video on my channel. They really don't talk about the age of consent laws. And actually, when I have seen them, and I've actually been at one of their events in person when this happened, when they do talk about it, it's more that these are anarchists, so they don't believe the government as in its current form should exist. So they don't believe in laws, not because they don't believe in protecting kids. They don't believe the government should be making laws in any way. And so what they're saying is, and again, I've heard them say this in person. I have it on tape because I secretly recorded it. They say, we don't think these laws should exist because kids are autonomous human beings, but at the same time, we should be protecting them from sexualization. That's what I hear more.
Well, I respectfully, I don't see that. I've read Judith Butler and Gail Rubin. Foucault literally signs the paper with academics in France, advocating for the total abolishment of age of consent laws, right? They thought that children, if they consent to an adult having sex with them, then it's fine. I can see, and this is directly related to the sexualization of children that's going on in America right now, right? Talk about drag queens reading to school children. They're trying to deprogram and, essentially strip away their innocence for preparation for this stuff.
Yeah,
So I see a lot of overlap.
but again, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But like
Yeah.
I do think that it's important to know that drag queens are not about the sexualization of children. Drag queens are about teaching kids that gender is a performance that's as easy as changing your outfit. And so like, and I understand why you think these things. And I'm not saying that there aren't writings that could lead to that conclusion. What I am saying, and I would invite you to peruse the hundreds of hours of video that I have on my channel about this. We actually been covering a whole bunch of queer Marxism in the last week or so. Like they really don't talk about that in their trainings. And I look at all sorts of different people advancing these ideas. I listen to all different perspectives, and I have never once heard, even when they're directly lecturing about Foucault or they're directly talking about Butler, where they go to those places. So this is a case of like, so here's part of the problem, and I think this does actually go back to the part of the problem with James Lindsay too, is that academics are going to write crazy shit. I think we can all agree on that, right? Academics are going to write crazy shit. Sometimes that crazy shit is going to be published either into a book or into an academic paper. That doesn't mean that that crazy shit ends up in the real world in practice when it comes to the people who are actively pushing these ideas. So I think it's one of those things where, yeah, Foucault wrote crazy things, but that doesn't mean that's what activists are doing in the real world. Butler writes crazy things. That doesn't mean that's what the activists are doing. They are taking some inspiration from them, certainly. I mean, they do quote Foucault and in the anarcho-communist writings that we read. But Judith Butler's entire thing is about gender performativity. They call Foucault and Butler the, godparents of queer theory. So it's not that they're uninfluential, but what I'm saying is not all of their crazy ideas are actually making it into the real world. And I think when we take those ideas out of context and we don't have evidence that this is actually something that's being lectured about or taught or things like that, that's where it starts to become a problem. Does that make sense?
I agree, but I when you look at queer theory, I have the founding document of queer theory open right now, and it's Gail Rubin literally defending the concept of boy lovers. This is where you have this whole map thing, right? It's directly related.
No, hang on. We're not going to talk about that because again, I this is not lectured about in the real world. This is not taught in the real world. This is not something like, again, and I say this with all due respect because I do believe that you know your stuff. I'm not questioning your knowledge in this area at all. But
Absolutely.
But what I will say is that again, like I think this is something that people use. I'm not saying these ideas don't exist, but they are not part of the real world activist agenda. And actually that's a good thing, by the way. It's not a bad
exactly.
It's not a bad thing that they're not pushing, like they're not pushing the map stuff. They're just not. There are onesies and twosies that are pushing it, but those onesies and twosies are not speakers at the main conferences. They're not teaching classes. They're not on book tours all over the country. They're not influential in the overall space. And so that's, I guess, my perspective.
Well, I see what you mean, and it's all respect. And I love hearing your voice. I'm a longtime follower and listener. I just see very distinct kind of connections from queer theory, whatever you want to call this stuff. Woke. There's so many words for it, right? Let's start with political correctness, all this stuff. I see direct links from specifically queer theory to what's going on now and with the kind of gender madness. It's all related.
Yes.
Pat Califia wrote distinctly about gender. Right. He eventually transitioned. Right. He's a woman now. So it is all crazy. It's nonsense. I think people need to be educated specifically about queer theory and all the stuff to kind of have a comprehensive understanding of all of it. Right. So that's all I wanted to point out.
Hey, I 100% agree with you on the gender thing. And actually, I've been talking about this a lot this week for people who may not have heard me say this before. The goal of queer Marxism is to abolish the gender binary. So it's actually to abolish the whole idea of gender. And this is actually what I think is the most dangerous idea. This is something that's being taught at their conferences and their trainings and in high schools. This is why you have school districts where upwards of 40% of kids are identifying as non-binary or genderqueer or gender fluid. Non-binary literally means no binary. So when they're talking about abolishing the gender binary, they're talking about getting rid of men and women entirely because they believe that they are a social construct that was created by capitalism. And what would happen if they get rid of the gender binary is that is inherently going to lead to the abolition of the nuclear family, which is also one of their goals because they believe the nuclear family is the means of reproduction of capitalism, and they can't get rid of capitalism without getting rid of the nuclear family. So on the gender piece, you and I are in total 100% agreement.
Right. I love that you just mentioned the nuclear family. This is like I'm saying, Carl. this stuff is all interrelated. When you jump back, talking about the nuclear family, look at Adorno, the authoritarian personality, right? It comes down to the father in the home. He's the authoritarian personality, and that's what, inspires fascism, a strong father figure. That's why they want to destroy families. So, I mean, it's all interrelated. That's what I see, at least. I see those connections pretty broadly. So, I mean, I have big problems with, obviously, right? Any sensible person who's on, I guess our political persuasion have a problem with this. So I see big kind of connections to that, and it's all very kind of disturbing. And I think if more people knew about what these, Foucault, what these queer theorists were saying, I think would alarm a lot more people. So I think that, I mean, like I said, I'm a clipper for Keith Woods. He's got great content about, queer theorists and the Frankfurt School. So I'd encourage everyone to look into that to, kind of further educate themselves and understand this degenerate problem. Right?
I didn't know that Keith was actually talking about that content. I barely, I obviously know who he is, but I haven't really looked at his content with any sort of great depth. So I'm interested to see what he has to say about that. Certainly something I'll look into. One final thing I want to say about this, and then I want to go to Unaligned Radical to see what he has to say, because he hasn't talked yet, is this is why I'm so stringent about people understanding what the definition of capitalism is from the left's perspective. It's not an unimportant detail, because when you get into capitalism being defined as private property ownership, and then you understand that one of the things that they're defining as private property is literally parental rights. We have communists saying this on video over and over and over again, that parental rights are a form of private property that will be abolished under capitalism. I have them on tape saying they want kids to have multiple sets of parents. It's that whole it takes a village mindset. And I think that, and again, I blame James Lindsay for this, because James Lindsay claims that he has educated his audience in this, but he really hasn't. We've scrubbed his content looking for this, and he has never explained it to his audience that abolishing capitalism means abolishing parental rights. And this is where all the attacks on parental rights are coming from, is from this idea. And people don't understand this, and so that's why no one is actively fighting back against it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to. It's your space. I don't want to be the only one speaking. After this, I'll stop. I would love to connect after, but yeah. I mean, it's James Lindsay's doing a great disservice to his audience, right? I mean, it's like a half education, right? He's only half talking about the problem. It's like, grains of truth in just a cesspool of just nonsense, right? So, I mean, I would encourage him to, he's not going to listen to me, but I would encourage him to talk about the real truth. And you're right. It's like, it's about autonomy for the child. And it's like, I mean, these queer theorists thought the same thing. They thought that, children can consent. And it's crazy, right? Like, it is just absolutely just the worst kind of stuff. And this is what gets, and if people, if the average person knew about this, they would be totally disgusted and up in arms. And this would, a lot of parents and mothers, I would assume, would be deeply concerned by this, right? And knowing that the modern left has this kind of strain of ideology that runs rampant in it, the trends and all this thing and all this stuff, like, it's very concerning, and people need to know about it. So that's the last thing I'll say.
No, let's definitely connect after this. Again, I you obviously know your stuff, and I think that would love to talk further about this. And for people who don't know, this is basically what we spend all the time in my community doing, is on my YouTube channel, my Rumble channel, and I stream it on X as well. We watch the far left training, so you guys can actually see what they're saying, and you can see them articulate these ideas. I have them on tape saying fuck parental rights. I have them on tape saying, children are the private property of their parents. I have a whole lecture on tape where they're talking about the idea of adult supremacy, and how we need to liberate kids from adult supremacy, because adult supremacy was, of course, created by capitalism in their world. And so the left is not shy about these ideas. And one of the things that I've been just trying to do for years now is to get normal people to actually just look at what the left is saying, because you're absolutely right in that if normal people knew what was being said, they would be up in arms. They would go crazy. This is why people become so committed to my content, because it is bizarre to see these things over and over and over again, and to know this stuff is happening right in front of us. And then you look in conservative media and no one will talk about it, and no one will tell their audiences what's going on. And it is infuriating, but we need to work to get the word out to as many normal people as possible, because obviously influencers on the conservative right are not going to save us. Anyway, Unaligned Radical, you've been brought up as a speaker, and I want to hear what you have to say about all this.
Yeah, hey guys, great discussion, great discourse. I'm still taking a lot of this in. I've been following your work for a while, Carlin, precisely because of what you just laid out. you're one of the few people that actually covers the left, the far left, whatever you want to call it. I call them the leftist identity politics centered left. I don't know. It's kind of difficult to come up with a name for it, which is definitely like a big part of the problem, right? Or even a symptom of the problem, which is that no one's really able to pinpoint this, or the people that should and that claim that they are pinpointing it aren't doing that at all. Like James Lindsay, among others. I just want to ask a question. I was gonna bring up some stuff about like the ADL. That was for me
sure.
a very big through line to kind of interestingly, right? Like I keep finding hearing from more people that they connect all this stuff, or everything goes back to the Kabbalah, and the ADL for me, just observing them was kind of the starting point. But instead of that, I want to ask a question about like the queer theory doctrine that Chief Keith brought up. I haven't read most of this material that you guys discussed myself, so this is not coming from firsthand knowledge. But I also recently watched that stream you did, Carlin, about the the Nashville trans, or not trans. Not trans, queer shooter,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So he, I don't know. Yeah. They
them.
they them. Yeah. Then after that, that stream was really interesting because you also went over like the presenters, these educators, two of them, who gave presentations, that you and your community presumably infiltrated and recorded their presentations, a bit of it, especially the one, the forget his name.
Autistic sex ed, Dylan Capet. I know exactly what you're talking
Dylan
about.
Capet, yes, Dylan Capet, yeah. Especially him, it was just, that was the most, I've been watching this kind of space, the kind of libs of TikTok people, not following them, but I look at the stuff they put out. I'm not really I'm personally really not a fan of them. I think they're absolutely outraged porn, like engagement farming, kind of grifters, if you will, for the most part. But they put out stuff that is, important for people to see, at least sometimes. Point being that I've watched this type of content, kind of shocking, groomer type of stuff coming out of this side of the left for a while. But this presentation in particular, this was the most shocking, piece of evidence that I've seen. Yeah. And that says a lot to me. I was like, wow, I'm surprised that it could be this bad. But so getting back to that little discussion you guys just had, which like these types of discussions need to happen more. I'm really disappointed that they aren't happening more. Just, conversations about these types of things. But you said that, you can't find them lecturing directly about that, right? About age of consent in particular. Yep. But we do see like kind of undercurrents of, pedophilia or grooming and stuff like that. How do you, do you agree with that, Carlin, or Chief Keith?
Okay, so let me go back. I have so much to say, and I would like to actually hear from Chief Keith as well on this as well. But just to unpack that. So first off, I want to say, I appreciate you tuning into my content. Thank you for the thoughtful content, the comments that you've made. I really do appreciate it. I do, like, I actually want more of these conversations to happen. So that's part of the reason why I'm recording a podcast right now, and I want to start recording my podcast as Twitter Spaces, so that it's not just me talking into a microphone and pontificating. I want to hear from you guys, and I want to have some back and forth. And so that's part of what we're doing right now, and I do anticipate doing many more of these, just because it's actually starting to work out really well, and I think it'll be a good thing. So look forward to more of that. People can follow me, set notifications, stuff like that, if they want to be involved in them and catch them live. So what On the Line Radical is talking about, for people who may not know, is in the beginning of 2023, so this is over a year and a half ago now, I, along with my community, infiltrated a private training called Autistic Sex Education, led by a graduate student at the University of Philadelphia called Dylan Caput. Now, the reason we targeted this training was because this training had actually been given as a keynote at the National Sex Ed Conference in December of 2022. And so this was not just some sort of random training. This was something that was literally taught to sex educators that are working in public schools all over the country. And I highly encourage people to go back and watch this training. I have a whole Twitter thread about it. You can go to my Substack, which is carlin.substack.com, and just look up Autistic Sex Education. If you go to my YouTube channel, there's actually a playlist right at the very top of my channel homepage with the full presentation in it, the full infiltration. I've got clips, I've got all that stuff, because it was deeply and profoundly disturbing. We got this person on tape, and this person is a non-binary autistic, they, them, who is a self-diagnosed autistic, because apparently that's what they're doing now. And this person is talking about basically teaching autistic children how to masturbate, teaching autistic children how to talk dirty, teaching autistic children about how to find porn, how to find OnlyFans, teaching them about how to use sex toys, and just like every crazy thing that you think of, like this person was teaching. And so this is definitely a now sex ed is a little bit weird in the context of this. So where we can agree is that sex ed in schools and comprehensive sex education specifically, if you got kids in schools that have that are taking comprehensive sex education, that shit is going off of the rails rather quickly. And that actually could be a piece of evidence that I would say that is overtly sexualizing kids, and it's sexualizing them at a young age too. We're not talking about high school kids. Actually, my community infiltrated the National Sex Ed Conference this past year, and we got the whole thing on tape. And again, people can find that on my channel, or you can come to me. I'll give you clips of it or whatever. So they're talking about sexualizing kids through comprehensive sex ed programs starting in elementary school. And so that is actually very real, and that is something that I can follow and say, okay, this is a legitimate case of grooming. However, like most of the time when I see grooming and when I define grooming, I'm really talking about it more in terms of like teaching kids that they are not the gender that they were born as. That's the most common form of grooming I see. That is definitely happening through like comprehensive sex education and stuff like that. But the thing about autistic sex education, and this has actually come out since then, I think I was the first person to infiltrate a training like this, and since then there have been all these things that have come out about how the queer community and queer educators are specifically targeting autistic students, and the reason they're doing that is because autistic students become completely fixated on the idea of gender, and so that starts to be all they think about, and then they come out as non-binary because autistic students feel weird. I mean, like everyone feels weird when they're going through puberty, but of course, like autistic students have like, you know, they're also like, in terms of like their social interactions and stuff like that, they feel probably a little bit more weird than other people, and so they convince themselves they're non-binary, which is of course the point, because the goal of queer theory is to abolish the gender binary entirely. And so that's kind of my perspective on that. And, I'd love to hear Chief Keith, did you have anything to say about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I know they like to fuck with these spaces, right? Your connection will get throttled or whatever. So my phone's been acting up. But yeah, no, everything you're saying is right, Carlin. It's like the work you do is so important to try to expose this stuff. And I saw something recently that was very similar, like remarkably similar. It was an autistic woman on TikTok who, said that during COVID they started, going into these TikTok rabbit holes, and they eventually were convinced by people that they were trans, right?
Yep.
So I mean, this stuff literally all comes from grooming, right? And that's an unfortunate part of all this, and it is prolific in the schools, right? I constantly see educators and teachers or paraprofessionals, they're, writing their pronouns on the board. They're talking about LGBT. They're teaching students about non-binary. I mean, it's sick, right? It is sick. And if, more parents knew about this stuff, there would be total outrage as to what's going on.
Yep.
And, yeah, sorry.
No, I completely agree. And another thing is, so another training that we actually found a training, this was earlier this year sometime, and this was we found it on a YouTube video with like 3 views or something, but this was a training that was funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It was a teacher education training that was given in Southern California earlier this year, but it's given all over the country. That just happened to be the training that ended up on YouTube. And what they said in this training was, they were teaching teachers that if a student comes into the classroom and they write on the chalkboard there are only two genders, then that is actually considered to be a form of harassment, and the teachers need to step in and punish the student who did it.
I mean, it is crazy. Like, and this is why you have, these ordinances that are being passed by these schools that where if a student tells a teacher that they are trans or something like that, the teacher has been sworn into silence.
Yep.
For the student, they can't tell the parent. But I mean, it's directly related. So, all this stuff, and it goes down to teaching them at a young age about what sex is. It is literally to steal these children's innocence into order to begin the grooming process. It is crazy. And this stuff trickles down. It trickles down to the age of consent. I mean, it trickles down to even child porn laws, right? I have a quote from Gail Rubin where she says, quote, "The laws produced by the child porn panic are ill-conceived and misdirected. They represent far-reaching alterations in the regulation of sexual behavior and abrogate important sexual civil liberties," right? So, I mean, this is insane, right? They believe that child porn should be legal. They believe there should be no age of consent. They believe that children should be taught about sex and, even in some cases, experiment on each other at a young age to, embrace this stuff. It's vile. And, if people don't care about their money, right? People talk about what voters care about and what, parents care about. They certainly care about their fucking children, right? So, putting this stuff out there and putting it out to parents, certainly in a way that's digestible, in a way that people can understand it and actually see the truth is direly important. So I love everything you do.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Hey, thank you. And you and I, again, we're gonna have to disagree about like the sexualization and the child porn stuff. And I know you have sources saying that, but I'm saying in terms of like real world application, I don't see that. But what I will say is what you brought up that I do absolutely agree with is that is one of the attacks on parental rights that they're making it is directly through the school districts in terms of kids identifying as a different name, different gender at schools, and then the school districts are literally not allowed to tell parents that the kids are doing that. This has created lawsuits all over the country. This has led to like more than one student like attempting suicide, honestly, where like they're going into school every day and like the teachers are calling them one name and using one set of pronouns, and then they go home and they're using another name and another set of pronouns, and they're lying to their parents, and the school is lying to their parents. And there have been more than one cases where this has actually made kids suicidal and it's ended up in lawsuits to school districts and stuff like that. But that, I believe, is an attack on parental rights, and it's also about abolishing the gender binary. I don't see the sexualization in it, but you know what, Chief Keith, we can agree to disagree on that. I know your sources are solid for the grounding of it. Our disagreement is just what ends up in the real world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree to disagree for sure.
And hey, listen, if people can provide me with video clips of real activists talking about this stuff, I will change my position in a heartbeat. But I'm in a position where I need the actual like video to be able to say, okay, this is really happening.
Yeah, no, I understand. And, they would do well to, if they did kind of believe this, they would do well to obscure it, right? When a lot of, we know that the left's agenda is very covert, right? So some of this stuff, maybe it's not really here yet, but it is coming down the pipe. We can see that from gay marriage to trans rights. I believe that there's a direct kind of continuum there.
Actually, Chief Keith, you should watch you should listen to the Twitter space I did. Well, I took the Twitter space down. It's on my Substack though, but you should watch the episode I did about the queer Marxism marathon the other day, because this is a really interesting thing that I think you might find. So we talked earlier about how queer and narco-communism has heavily influenced like what we're seeing in the world, and how it's resulted in this like mutated strain of Marxism that is not necessarily grounded in like Marx and Mao and Marcuse and like all these things. It's mutated off into something else. So the other day we were reading a queer and anarcho-communist document all about polyamory. They were talking about gay marriage, and then later that day we listened to something out of a book called Queer Anarchism, where they were specifically talking about gay marriage, and it was written in 2012, and they were talking about like how they were still fighting to legalize it at that time because it wasn't legalized until 2015. Anyway, real queer Marxists and queer activists didn't want gay marriage legalized. They didn't even want people to be fighting for that because they don't actually want gay people participating in marriage. They think that marriage is a capitalist institution that upholds normativity in the nuclear family. So essentially, if you look at these documents from the anarcho-communist community or from what they were writing back then, they were basically saying, why the fuck are you guys even like putting effort into this? This is stupid. You're trying to align they basically consider it to be homonormativity. So it's like the gays aligning with the straights. And so you might want to look into that because it is actually a really interesting thing.
Yeah, no, I mean that word heteronormative, I mean literally came out of the academic classroom, right? So this is the thing that's amazing about all this stuff. It was all literally contrived in a classroom. So, you hate university culture. This is where it all came from, right? It all came from these academics. And I totally see what you're saying about the whole, heteronormative stuff and homonormative. I've heard that from Marxists before that, actually gay marriage is just kind of like, sucking up to capitalism, right? Because it's embracing the nuclear family, but, in a rainbow. I mean, it almost is like redundant because it's like, well, all right, then why fight for anything then? Because you just want to have a total tear down of society.
Yes.
And it is amazing.
That's
like,
what they want.
It is amazing, like how some of these, I guess, woke, radical, neo-Marxists, Marxist humanists, whatever you want to call it. I mean, a lot of them actually reject Marx. Actually, they totally reject what he had to say. They call him racist. He's a white male. You shouldn't want to listen to him. You want to listen to someone else. It is baffling, right? And it's like, when it comes to people, how people kind of wake up to this stuff. Literally, the education system is pushing this. Like, they know that they need to indoctrinate a new generation with this ideology in order for it to succeed, right? When you talk about how people become conservative, it's never that the establishment is telling them to become conservative or right wing. They always have to find some other source of information that wakes them up. This is direct indoctrination onto the children to kind of can keep this bullshit going, and it's working in a lot of ways. You have people with their children, and their children are calling the parents racist because they said something that they heard from the teacher in school. And it's crazy. It is total indoctrination, total brainwashing. And like I said before, knowing the source of this, you can identify the problem. You know where it's coming from. It's coming from the Frankfurt School. It's coming from the education system. It's coming from all this stuff. It's baffling. It's sick, and people need to know about it. So,
hey, I really appreciate you coming out today. I am going to be closing out the space. We've been going for a little over an hour now, and I feel like we got some really great stuff. And, it may have started as a space where I was complaining about James Lindsay lying and deceiving millions of people, and I still am committed to that perspective. But what I will say is I really appreciate everyone that came up and had some really fruitful conversation. Thank you to everyone who participated, and I would welcome you guys for future spaces. Again, I am actually recording this space for an episode of my Actively Unwoke podcast. You can find it I'm doing it live on my YouTube channel as well, but you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can head over to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Click on the podcast link in the upper menu. That will give you the entire back catalog of episodes, which to this point have just been me talking into a microphone, but I'm really enjoying this whole Twitter space thing where I get to have other people involved and we get to see where the conversation goes. So I will be doing more of these in the future. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. I'm Dr. Carlyn B, DrKarlyn, the letter B. And please come and talk in the future, and I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. And I will be posting this episode of the podcast to the different podcasting platforms soon. And that's all we have for right now, guys. I will be streaming at 5 p.m. today, and I think we're going to watch that video of James talking to a rabbi, just because I think that'll be very enlightening and entertaining and illuminating for all of us. So thank you again for everyone who came out. I appreciate you. I'm just going to go ahead and mute the space just so we don't cut off the very end of it on the recording. But I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you next time.